Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of our Community Access. This week, we went to the Oxford Cemetery tour. Don't miss this one on our Community Access. Welcome back. Have you visited any cemetery other than your family? This week we will hear some interesting information about our history of Oxford at the Oxford Cemetery Tour. Done some wonderful, colorful to tell their stories. Let's watch.
Okay. My name's Jim Latola. I'm kind of the organizer of this soiree today. Basically what it is we're organize a tour as a fundraiser for the Northeast Oakland Historical Society and Museum. We have patrons coming through, they're getting a tour and a little history lesson. Main thing is we have people in costume telling the story of some of Oxford's early businessmen who became prominent in the neighborhood or the town and the growth of Oxford over the years. Many of them have really quite extraordinary stories, oftentimes rags to riches stories. So it's just part of our organization is to educate the future about Oxford's past. So, that's what we're doing.
His parents were John and Sophia Dade Tensta, and they also were born in England. In 1863, our dear Dr. Bell from Oxford was attending an event in Detroit at the Bijou Theater, and they struck up a conversation, and Dr. Bell told William that there was a hardware store in Oxford. So he hopped on a train, took that to Pontiac, Michigan, then found a stagecoach that would take him from Pontiac to Oxford, and he got a job at the hardware store with Ira Killam. He worked for Mr. Killam for 2 years, and then Mr. Killam sold the hardware store to an A.A. Stanton, and when Mr. Stanton sold the hardware store, he sold it to my husband, William Tensta. And this is my sister, Margaret Davison Tunstead. Yes, we married brothers.
Charles was born in Ontario, Canada. In 1871, he moved to the United States, lived in Pennsylvania, Missouri, and Minnesota before he moved to Michigan. He was the owner of Mascot Cigar Company for 15 years. As husband and wife, we lived in Oxford for 32 years before we moved to Detroit. In 1906, Charles passed away from injuries he sustained in an automobile accident. I passed away in 1921.
Hello, I'm Mrs. John Bachelor. My friends call me Hattie. I was raised in Oakwood, just north of Oxford, and I feel like I've known John all my life. He was raised in a nearby town called Oakwood, and we both went to Oxford schools, and we married in 1897, the year after the cyclone went through. John led a very interesting life. His parents adopted him when he was 4 years old, and he loved his father so much that he wanted to be a doctor just like Dr. Watts was. So the two of them had their own business in Oxford called Bachelor and Bachelor, and they resided at 47 North Washington Street, which is right on Main Street. Dr. John was a loving father, loving husband, and I enjoyed living with him so much.
My name is Everett Dennison. I was born in New York State in 1824. I'm one of two children born to Benedam Dennison and Harriet Babcock, who had married on May 13th of 1818, 200 years ago. My father was a descendant of Captain George Dennison, who had arrived in the colonies as a young boy in the early 1600s. I had not reached the age of 4 years old when my father passed away. In 1834, we were still living in New York when my mother married Andru Glaspie. Mr. Glaspie's wife had passed away, leaving him in charge of a large family of 8 children. Together, a combined family, 10 children, were soon added to by 2 more children. By 1840, most of us were adults when our family moved to Michigan and settled in Macomb County. My stepfather, Andru Glaspie, died in 1846. My mother was once again a widow. She married Ludovic Stanton, another widower, with a son in 1853. I married Elizabeth Smith. In 1850, we had our own farm in Washington Township, Macomb County. I was 26 years old, and we were blessed with 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. By 1860, we were farming in neighboring Oakland Township, Oakland County. Elizabeth and I retired from farming in 1881 and moved to Oxford to enjoy conveniences of living in town. We purchased 60 acres, southwest portion of the village. This property had previously been owned by the Clemens family and extended west from Washington Street to the area of what would later become Pontiac, Oxford and Northern Railroad, now Pollyant Trail, then up to Burdick. The railroad was so important to the growth of any area at that time. The Detroit Bay City Railroad laid out through Oxford and construction would be completed in 1872, a very significant time. The arrival of the railroad would lead to a growth in the area and additional homes in the village. Seeing this opportunity, the need for new homes, I used our land to develop an additional housing lots in 1881. This is known as the Dennison addition to the town. I had great interest in the town's development. At the first official meeting of the village, I was elected as a trustee. My mother, Harriet Stanton, died in our home in 1874. She is buried here in the Oxford Cemetery, not far from where we are standing. I had purchased cemetery lots in Oxford Cemetery when our granddaughter, Ellie Mae Dennison, our son William's infant daughter, died in 1881. With my son Eber, we had the Dennison vault constructed in 1887. When I died in 1892, at the age of 68 years old, I was buried in lots near our granddaughter and the entrance to the cemetery. My mother, along with many of Gillespie and Stanton family relation, rests here. My contributions to Oxford are remembered today by the receiving vault here in the cemetery and the Dennison addition to the proud achievements of the village. Also, the Emmanuel Congregational United Church of Christ on the corner of Hovey and Dennison was built in 1879, was built on our property, the Dennison addition, 13 years before my death. And I'm very proud of it.
Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Breakshot. I was the wife of Mr. William H. Breakshot. I was from New York originally. My parents were the Birds, Mary and Richard Bird, and we moved here to Groveland Township, Michigan. I was born on July 17, 1839, which makes me about 127 years old today, so bear with me if I forget anything. My husband William was also born in New York, May 17, 1840, and his family also immigrated to Michigan, where they lived on a farm in Groveland Township. Richard was a shoemaker, his father, so William became a shoemaker, and he moved to Clarkston, where he practiced shoemaking and apprenticed for 7 years. We met and we were married on August 24th. It was a Sunday, and we have been very happy ever since. William, however, was quite patriotic, and he decided to join the Civil War. He signed up with the 24th Michigan Infantry, and he was stationed in Springfield, Illinois, until April 25th, 1865, when President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The 24th Michigan was assigned to be an honor guard for the president at his funeral and on his trip. When they got back to Springfield, he was set up in the House of Representatives Hall where he used to actually work. They had a watch for 24 hours, sunrise to sunrise, and over 75,000 people would go by the president's coffin. There are drawings that show William standing at the head of the coffin. It was an honor for him. It was something that he would value all of his life. He went on to come home and start a farm implement business in Ortonville. He did that for about 10 years, but then his injuries from the war started bothering him, so he sold the business, claimed his Civil War pension, and opened another farm where we lived for 9 years until he moved to Oxford. We moved to Oxford in 1894, and we bought what was called the Oxford Hotel then, and we changed the name to the Commercial House Hotel, and it was a temperance hotel. There was no alcohol. We opened on November 1st, 1895, and it was to be a home. It was like opening a first-class home to travelers. And we worked the hotel for about 14 years, and then again, William's injuries were bothering him, and he did retire, and I went on to manage the hotel for another year with my son, William, my young son, William. And then I became ill on October 24th, 1910, I would pass away. There is a mystery here. William was a member of the GAR, Post 187, and there's a soldier buried here in our family tomb. There is no name, no date, no rank. We have no idea who the soldier was. William probably knew, though. He was either a member of the GAR or he was a Union soldier that had stayed at our hotel and died and no one had claimed him. Or he could have been a Confederate soldier that nobody had claimed, a rebel. And whoever he was, William took pity on him and as a fellow soldier buried him here in our family plot. And as you can see the flag, he has been honored that way ever since. But it's a mystery, lost to history.
Hi, my name is Elvira Crawford. I was born in Oakland Township and moved to Oxford when I married my husband, Clarence Crawford. Clarence his family was Calvin and Clarissa Crawford. They came here from New York, and Clarence was the oldest of 7 children. Clarence would later enlist in the Civil War. When he came back from the Civil War, we were married. We lived on the family farm for a short time, where Clarence was a farmer. He also had a wholesale distribution business. He sold poultry, produce, and eggs. When he retired from that, he rented his farmland out to others, and we moved into town. Clarence's father, Calvin, was a builder, and he was held in high esteem in Oxford, such that they named Crawford Street after him. He platted 10 acres of ground to the village of Oxford, known as the C. Crawford addition to Oxford Village. Clarence and I had 2 children, Edith and Ralph, and Clarence, once he was in town, began a business where building carriages with his brother George. We made the speeding pneumatic carriage. It had pneumatic tires. It was something that we knew everybody'd want, so our little company of 15 people was looking to employ more. In the meantime, in 1905, my husband bought an interest in the Detroit and Oxford Auto Company to build a car. They built a car which was seen touring around Oxford. It was designed by a Mr. Radkin, but a Mr. Rankin was the man who had the design for it, and he sold shares. And they sold shares for $10 a piece, figuring that if they had the controlling interest in the company, that the car would be built in Oxford. Unfortunately, Fostoria, Ohio was rumored to build the car because they had got the controlling interest. By the time they found that they didn't have the controlling interest, Oxford had already sold what they could of their stocks, and so no more cars were ever built. Our children had passed away, so Clarence and I moved to Detroit. We lived in Detroit for a short time. when Clarence passed away in January of 1910. He was brought back by special railway car to Oxford for his final resting place and a funeral. I joined Clarence in August of the same year.
My name is Charlotte Randall. I am the wife of Charles Randall. My family came to Oxford in 1851, and Charlie's family came sometime after that. He was 27 years old when he came to this area, and he was almost penniless. He looked for work from the Stanton House Hotel, and they sent him out to the Groff Farm in the northwest corner of Oxford. He worked there for $12 a month. Well, he was an entrepreneur, so that was not going to be enough money for him, and he looked at how to do and sell fruit. His first venture only netted $8 for the entire shipment of apples that filled 2 railroad cars. From that failed adventure, he did not lose heart, but decided that he would stay in the produce business. By the time Charlie retired, he was buying $750,000 worth of fruit and vegetables, a lot of potatoes and a lot of navy beans, and shipping them all over Michigan and the eastern part of the United States. In fact, there are some that said that he was the largest produce distributor in the country. He also had his fingers in many other ventures. He helped establish Oxford Bank. He also was part of the group that got the franchise for the railway car that went through Oxford and also serviced southeast Michigan all the way to Detroit and other areas. He was also on the school board for 44 years and played an important role in all of Oxford politics. Our home at 30 Burdick Street is still there today. It was at one time called the Patterson House, but we built that house in 1894. In fact, we had parties, themed parties that were fabulous, and one year it was called A Night at the Circus, and we had a trapeze artist that came. We served all kinds of refreshments and played games, and that party was the talk of the town for many years to come.
So I'm Andru Glaspie, Andru P. Glaspie. And at one point in time here in Oxford, I was the postmaster for about 14 years. In addition to that, I have a long-standing history in my family of serving my country. My father was in the war. My grandfather was in the war. My grandfather in the Revolutionary War. My father in the War of 1812. And I served in the Civil War. I fought in 3 separate battles. Took significant injury during that time period. And at the point when I was discharged, I came home really being told that there was no way really that I would survive and that I should get my affairs in order, but I proved everybody wrong. And at that point in time, I was able to open up a store here in Oxford. I owned a gentleman's clothing store, and I also had a grocery store at one point in time. There were a lot of very connecting situations here in history. My mother, Harriet Babcock, who was first married to Mr. Dennison, when Mr. Dennison passed away, my mother married my father, Mr. Glaspie. My father died when I was 4, and my mother then went on to eventually marry Mr. Stanton, and that's why I have some Stantons behind me. So there's a lot of rich connection here in Oxford that is tied to not just my family, but all the families. My son Philo, I had 2 sons, Andru and Philo, and I also had a daughter, and my one son, Philo, was also married to Mr. and Mr. Randall's daughter, so there's another connection in the community. It's just one big happy family, if you will.
My name is Helena Shott, but my friends call me Lena. I met Peter Bocart, my first husband, and we had many things in common, including that our parents were both German immigrants. We were married in 1886. Our daughter, Irene, born that same year and when we moved to Oxford. And we became the owners of Bocart's Saloon. Later, Peter became foul of the local authorities, and he was accused of operating a billiard hall, which was contrary to the law at the time. He faced a $30 fine, but thought it was unfair, and he appealed to the Case Circuit Court. Fighting the case cost him more than if he had accepted the justice's ruling and paid the fine. Later, the saloon was sold, and he built a hotel. Later, he died of illness complications, and I met my future husband, who also worked there much later, and we raised our daughter together. And our daughter married a clerk at the hotel as well.
There you go. So the next time you drive and see another cemetery, somebody really important probably is resting there. Well, that's all the time for this week, and we hope you enjoyed our program. So for our cameras, Dan Weiss and Russell Currier, and for our editor and Terry Stiles, and our great performers, I'm Bill Service, and you have a great, great week.